Good evening, everyone, or afternoon, morning, whatever time you're tuning in. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the closing keynote for our 1619 Impact Showcase. As you are coming in, feel free to introduce yourselves. We'd love to know who you are and where you're joining from. If you've attended any of our earlier sessions, thank you. Thank you for returning. Thank you for carving out time on your Saturdays to be with us and to engage and learn with us as part of this transformative learning community. Right. The Pulitzer Center is excited to celebrate 5 years of partnership with and impact with the 1619 Project, including opportunities to partner with contributors to the project. My name is Kendra Grissom, and I am a program assistant on the Pulitzer Center's K-12 team, and I support our 1619 education program. And I am honored to be in conversation with our closing keynote speaker, Dr. LaGarrett King. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to briefly introduce the Pulitzer Center and to make sure everyone is clear on the logistics for our closing plenary session. So the Pulitzer Center's mission is to champion the power of stories to make complex issues relevant and inspire action. We do this work in collaboration with journalists, educators, and other organizational partners like the New York Times Magazine and the 1619 Project. The Pulitzer Center believes that journalism can be a key element for mobilizing society and that people and communities who actively engage with systemic challenges will find solutions together. This slide captures the center's five main journalistic focus areas at this time. Our partnership with the 1619 Project sits within our human rights, racial justice programming. Our programming today is a celebration of the work completed by our most recent program partners, our 1619 Impact Grantees. Through their presentations, you saw their deep engagement with the 1619 Project and the many ways they utilized and built on the project as part of their work. In this closing keynote address, we'll have the opportunity to hear from Pulitzer Center Education Partner and Professor of Social Studies Education, Dr. LaGarrett King, who has supported several 1619 Project education initiatives since its initial publication. And just a housekeeping note, your voice is important to us, and we want to help you stay connected to the conversation by posing questions. So please submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function. We will try to get as many of your questions as possible during the Q&A portion of this event. And now it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. King. Dr. LaGarrett King is an award-winning professor of social studies education and director of the Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education at the University of Buffalo. Dr. King has over 60 publications, including his most recent book, Teaching U.S. Enslavement, Lesson Plans, and Primary Sources. Dr. King is most known for his Black History framework, Black Historical Consciousness, which is the primary topic of his current book chapter, Teaching Black History for 6 through 12 Teachers, an introduction to the Black Historical Consciousness framework for teachers. Dr. King, thank you so much for being here. And now I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Of course, I am so delighted to be here. First of all, um, to be in community. Can you all see my PowerPoint?
We see the 1619 Impact event landing page.
Start this over again. So, don't see the PowerPoint any longer. Let's see. But I'm so happy to be here in community with everyone, to share a few words and thoughts around the concepts around Black history education. Um, how about now?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. All right. Great. 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 Sorry about that, everyone. Um, to talk a little bit about Black history education and 1619's impact on our teaching and kind of understanding of concepts around Black history education. And of course, I am the director for the Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education at the University at Buffalo, and I have a QR code for those who are interested and looking at our website to see what we are all about. I don't have a lot of time, so I don't want to, delve too much into the center, but the website provides you with all different types of information around what we do as a center, the support that we have for professional development around teachers and other events and activities that we do. I do want to highlight too, before I get into what I want to approach here for this evening. My colleague Abigail Henry joined us this school year as a graduate fellow for the center. She's also been very active within the Pulitzer Center and 1619 Project, but she came on to help us introduce our first cohort of our Teaching Black History micro-credentials. So for those who are interested in improving their instructional practices around Black history education, we began our Teaching Black History micro-credential, and we're looking for more students coming up in the school year 25-26. So if you're interested, everything is on our website. And then, of course, our most prominent event is our Teaching Black History Conference, which happens in July each year. This year, July 25th through the 27th in Buffalo, where we convene hundreds of educators, Black history educators, around topics around the most effective practices around Black history education. And this year's theme is Black Boy Joy, Black Girl Magic, the history of Black childhoods, and of course, information for that will, be up on our website very soon. But I want to, first of all, congratulate the Pulitzer Center for 5 years of, wonderful work and support for our teachers. As someone who has developed themes, particularly around concepts of Black history education, I know how hard it is to build and sustain communities. Um, and I connect the 1619 project and the Pulitzer Center, and was very interested in how teachers kind of conceptualized how to utilize that resource, as well as how to utilize and understand how to teach Black history. And for many of you all are familiar with my Black history framework that I call the Black historical consciousness, right? And these 8 principles deal with the most effective and humanizing way to teach around concepts of Black history, right? So for today, I just wanted to kind of look at the various different lesson plans that were on the website and people who have worked with the Pulitzer Center on lesson plans, and just kind of talk a little bit about how these particular principles and the 1619 project and lesson plans and the Pulitzer Center kind of connect to how we are effectively teaching concepts around Black history. So very briefly, these principles deal with anti-Blackness, oppression, and power, teaching Black agency, resistance, and justice, teaching Africa and the African diaspora, teaching Black emotionalities, Black identities, teaching about Black historical contentiousness, teaching about Black social histories, and the last one is teaching about Black futures. And I'm going to explain more in detail when I talk a little bit about how I see those connecting to the lesson plans that have been developed within the Pulitzer Center here. Now, in perusing some of the lesson plans, I see that many of the curriculum writers and lesson plan writers do very well in constructing lesson plans connected to the principles such as the concepts of oppression, right? Really tying in systemic aspects of Black history, systemic aspects of society, and helping students and helping teachers and helping society understand the anti-Blackness that is persuade within our society, right? We do a real good job talking about Black agency, resistance, and justice, right? How do we fight against those particular aspects of oppression? We do a decent job on the concepts of Africa and the African diaspora and how those particular cultures and histories are connected. Um, we do a good job on Black emotions within the concepts, particularly the concepts of Black joy, right? Which in many ways have been overused in many different instances, but in a sense of really trying to help us get away, because a lot of teachers and a lot of students and a lot of people in society are just fatigued over the concepts of oppression, despite the fact that we need to learn those particular aspects. But the concept of Black joy has been, something that many teachers have approached. The notions about Black identities, the different Black identities that make up history and our culture and life, and then the social histories. We do a really good job in understanding that learning about Black history is more about the bottom up instead of the top down, meaning that we learn more about regular people, we learn more about history through regular people than we do with these quote unquote famous people or top of the line people or government officials or these heroes and heroines that we laud within our history. But what we need to think a little bit more about as we progress through our progress through the curriculum and lesson plans that the Pulitzer Center is helping promote is that while we focus on notions of Black joy, which is very important, but Black emotions is more than just these joyous occasions. And sometimes we have to be very careful with the concepts of joy, right? Not that joy is not an important principle to learn within our schools and learn about how to deflect on various different concepts, but to understand that when we talk about Black humanity, our emotions make us human. So therefore, more approaches on concepts of Black rage, right? Black fear, right? Concepts of helping people understand while we're teaching about these oppressive conditions, that we're also teaching about the emotions that Black people had during those oppressive conditions will help us kind of understand the humanity of Black folk a little bit more deeply. Black identities, of course, with all these particular people who make up Black culture or Blackness. Um, the concepts of identities is extremely important, right? So instead of just focusing on Black males, Black heterosexuals, middle class, all these particular aspects, we need to focus on the concepts of Black women, right? The histories of the Black poor, right? The histories of the Black LGBTQA community, the histories of different religious groups, all these particular aspects that make up the Black history. Now, Black historical contention is something everyone needs to work on, right? Because in many times when we develop Black history lessons, what we do is we overcompensate for the lack of Black history and make Black history so perfect and pristine. In many ways, for us really to get at the true essence of the 1619 Project and the true essence of Black history education, we really need to understand the complexities within Black history. Black people have all throughout the history of the world have been guilty of all the isms that plague our society, right? And it's very important for us to identify those isms, right? And identify how Black people have pervaded and dehumanized other people throughout history. But what I really want to focus on today, which I think is extremely important as we move to another 5 years, another 10 years, another 15 years of the Pulitzer Center connection to the 1619 Project, is the concepts of Black futures. Now, for many people, when we talk about Afrofuturism or African futurism or Black futurism, Black futures, many people simply think about the concepts of science fiction. how Blackness kind of connects to the science fiction genre, right? And that's cool, right? Because science fiction, Black science fiction, Afrofuturism uses concepts of history to kind of teach about the future, and those particular aspects can be part of Black futures. And I really understand that that's a very important aspect. So we can get with English literacy teachers, we can get with various other teachers and have these combined lessons. But when I talk about the concepts of Black futures, what I'm talking about is when we begin to start developing our lessons, how do we take what we learn about the past and make it useful for the future? Right? There's a whole adage that people say all the time, if we don't learn history, we're bound to repeat it. And in many ways, we continuously repeat various different historical eras. So apparently, we're not really learning history if that's the case. But what we don't do well, not only with the 1619 project or connecting our lesson plans to the Pulitzer Center, is that we don't necessarily see how our histories and our history lessons help us reimagine or imagine the future beyond our past. So when we think about Black futures, it is about understanding that the principles, the Black historical principles, you know, anti-Blackness, oppression, agency, Africa and African diaspora, Black identity, social histories, it's about understanding the principles and being able to apply them to our current conditions, but also being able to see how this knowledge is useful for the future. So when we talk about and when we teach about oppression and agency, the diaspora, Black identity, social histories, contention, and emotions, how are we connecting it and how are we helping our students see the future based on these histories that we learn? In other words, are we allowing our students to dream? Are we allowing our students to dream about what's possible? Are we allowing our students to dream about a future that is totally different from the current conditions in which we live in? Can a world exist where we will stop having anti-Black racism? Can a world exist that we stop having all the isms that plague our society, right? And while some people may say, well, Dr. King, LaGarrett, that's very abstract. It's not. Every great every great invention that we use now was once a dream. This iPhone was a dream. It was a thought, and someone had to apply it. And now it's probably one of the most used, most useful items that everyone in the world uses. But when we talk about history and history classes, particularly when we talk about Black and brown students, we don't allow them to dream because we're so focused on testing. So therefore, our students never get to imagine a better future for themselves. So what am I talking about? Think of Black futures and you're thinking about three tiers. You're thinking about the histories that they learn. We're thinking about how to connect the histories to the present. And now we're thinking about, okay, histories, how do we connect the histories to the present? And how do we connect the histories to the future? Think about this. Your history is your blueprint, right? This is what has already happened, right? There's some good things that had happened in the past. There's some bad things. There's just some regular indifferent aspects that's happened in our past. And we have to ask ourselves then, well, what are these enduring concerns and problems? And how can we learn from this particular history? All right. And then when we connect that history to the present, we have to ask ourselves, are we still having these similar problems? And if so, what has changed? What has stayed the same? And what are we doing to fix these particular problems? Right. But the future is more about action, right? The history is our blueprint. Our present is our planning process. Okay, so how can we make this better? But our future is about action. Something I noticed during the COVID pandemic that I think everyone forgot about, because no one talks about COVID anymore, despite the fact that COVID is still here. No one talked about COVID during the election. It seems like that history has just erased our memories. One thing that I noticed about COVID, particularly when we begin to start having this, what some people will call this racial reckoning, right, is that there were these people that were so hungry to learn more about Black history, life, and culture, right? They were so hungry. These book clubs were springing up. All these people were getting hired to do these professional developments. All these people were very excited about learning this history. And every single time that I talked to people, and I've talked to all types of people, they kept on saying, we just didn't know. We just didn't know. That same language was used in the late 1980s and early 1990s with multiculturalism. We just didn't know. We just didn't know. The 1960s, when the mandating of Black history became popular in many states, we just didn't know this history. And the reason why we just didn't know is because we don't plan for the future. So let's take this. If we look at a history of, let's say we have a student that is thinking about being a community organizer or a social justice advocate when they become decision makers. One thing that we really need to understand as we teach our students is that we're not teaching a curriculum, we're teaching citizens. We're teaching people who will be decision makers in the near future. So our lessons and our histories have to attend to them being decision makers. So if we have this history, the 1960s civil rights movement, this person said, you know what, Dr. King, I want to be a community organizer. You know, Mr. So-and-so, I want to be a community organizer, social justice advocate. Well, what's wrong with having a history project that helps them understand about the 1960s civil rights movement and the more current Black Lives Matter movement? What lessons can we learn from these two movements? How were they similar? How were they different? What mistakes did both historical eras and groups make? Now, how do you learn from those mistakes to now become this social justice advocate that you would like to be in 2056? Right? Because I go back to the adage is we don't give our students, particularly Black and brown students, space to dream. One of the reasons why we continuously get stuck on this history cycle is that we teach the history and we leave it there. We don't teach the history and help students learn how to use that history. The problem is when they become decision makers, these people start back over, learning the history, learning what's the problem with contemporary society. If we do it now when there's children from K to 12th grade, they've already learned the history. They've already did the planning. And when they become decision makers, all they have to do is implement the action because they did all the mental work when they were students instead of starting back over when they become decision makers. So that's just kind of a call for me, for us who are building these wonderful lesson plans that has helped hundreds of teachers, you know, particularly around the United States, and probably worldwide, in presenting more complex and effective Black history curriculum for their schools, is that we can't forget about the future. We can't forget about the power of history and understanding that history doesn't just simply lay in the past. What it does is it helps us kind of understand our future. All right, so I'm going to stop here because I was told 15, 20 minutes. I may have went over, I'm not sure, but you know, hopefully and stuff, I'm being a good citizen here and you know, for everyone.
Oh, thank you, Dr. King. That was wonderful. And you've given us so much to consider about dreaming and creating, if I could borrow a term, Tanisha C4 used the term usable past in her work, Liberated Threads. And so I'm now definitely excited to pivot to our moderated discussion, to ask you some questions. And I definitely want to welcome our audience members to share any questions that they have. Um, for Dr. King using the Q&A function. So I'll get started with a few of my own questions. And so you mentioned, dreaming, you mentioned the importance of dreaming. And you also mentioned that you weren't going to talk much about, the center because you wanted to get into your presentation, but I actually want to talk about the Center for K-12 Black History Education. And I know that you've also done work at the Carter Center. I mean, you didn't just you're not just the director, but you're the founding director of
Yes,
these
yes.
spaces. So, what were your dreams and visions around creating these centers? Why did you choose to create these centers and house them in a university setting? What gaps or unmet needs did you see in the educational landscape that you sought to fill by creating them? What dreams did you have around these centers?
So, I've always been a lover of Black history education, right? I've always been a lover of Black history, history in general, but Black history is always kind of really exciting, right? I'm very excited every time I learn something new. Like, wow, this is great. And when I, was a teacher, I was doing all these, cool lessons or what I thought was cool lessons, right? And I'm like, wow, I wish I had other people to bounce these ideas off of, right? So when I went into graduate school at the University of Texas for my PhD, I started learning about the history of Black history, and we've been doing Black history since after the Civil War. And in schools, Black teachers, if you read Jarvis Given's books and you read other like Black history textbooks from the 19th century, you'll see that Black teachers have always been trying to infuse Black history in the curriculum. And so I started learning about all this stuff. And as a graduate student in the mid 2000s, I was just like, you know what, there hasn't been a space for K-12 teachers to come together and talk about Black history, despite the fact that we've been doing this in Shiloh's for a very long time, for over a century. Now, there's an Association for the Study of African American Life and History, but they're more collegiate, right?
Mhm.
But there hasn't been a space. So all the way in graduate school, I said, if I ever have an opportunity and an influence and power to create a center, I definitely will around K-12 history teachers who love Black history education. And that's where the idea for the Carter Center came when I was in Missouri. And then I wanted to add another dimension when I came to the University of Buffalo about the concept of racial literacy, because I think it's very important for us to understand that as we're teaching these racialized histories, that we understand that we have to be literate in racial concerns as we are kind of learning about that. So that's that. So that's kind of the dream that I had back in probably 2008, 2009, and then I got an opportunity in 2018 to make that dream come true. And we have educated probably over 5,000 educators in 8 years, and we're looking to continue to educate more.
That's incredible. Um, And thank you. Thank you for dreaming the space. Thank you for creating the space. And thank you for the work that you continue to do around it. So you mentioned, Asala and it being more collegiate. Now, I was a history PhD student for about 2 years before I
Mhm.
left my program. And one of my biggest critiques is that I was learning about African American history and I was learning historiography, but one of the things that was missing is that they were putting me in classrooms to be a teaching assistant. There was no training around how to teach African American history. I could tell you about the discipline, I could tell you the story behind the story, but how do I teach the story? So you've had the opportunity to offer training or professional development for those in higher education on how to teach African American history. What would it look like? What would you want them to consider?
Yeah, so I think It's two different worlds, right? From your professional Black historians, right?
Mm.
Your historians of Black history versus um, what I like to call myself and all the graduate students in the center, Black history educators, right? So there's a difference between content, right? Knowing a whole bunch of content, right? Which I do, and my colleagues do, but it's about the most effective way of how to translate that knowledge to people. So um for me it's all about kind of the perspectives of these histories and getting professors and teachers to help students actually read or see the history from those people's point of view, right? And that's very effective, right? And while most people are now kind of leaning towards the inquiry model of teaching, probably when you were in school and further back, people were just like they're just lecturing you, lecturing you. But actually having students read words and primary sources, but then also community folk who actually live those histories, right? It's very powerful because there's a disconnect between the actual lived experiences, what Manny Marble called living histories, right? Um, to those people where you're just learning history from a book, right? So for me, it has always been, hey, let's push these primary sources with these words from these people, these pictures from their perspective, right? And then also let's utilize living history, people who actually live those histories that may not be traditional mainstream aspects of history, but have those people come in and talk about their experiences during that historical period. I think it's very powerful.
Thank you. I know in one of your publications, you talk about um, the need to shift from a non-racist approach to teaching social studies to an anti-racist framework. And so do you mind telling us why it's critical for educators to shift from non-racism to anti-racism and how the teaching of Black history under a non-racist lens is different than that of Black history taught through an anti-racist lens and why those distinctions are so important?
Yeah, I think if we think about the history of Black history education, right? In many ways, particularly once the turn of the 20th century came about, the issue was never about Black history education per se. It was the kind of Black history that was taught in classrooms, right? So yes, you can teach um, Black history without teaching about anti-Blackness, oppression. You could just teach about people who have Black skin, and there's not and you can do it in a certain type of way where it's we don't approach it, and we kind of see that now politically with different groups who have these different curriculum out there that really focuses on what they would like to call like these Black heroes and acceptable and respectable histories, and and so hey, these are these people that pull themselves up from the bootstraps and they are American heroes, and this person was the first person to do this and the first person to do that, but there's no discourse around, well, why were they the first? Right? It's 1964. Why were they the first person, right? Was it because Black people didn't have the intellectual capabilities to do this? I mean, was it because of this? Was it because of that? And that's where we're talking about kind of this non-racist versus anti-racist approach to history teaching and Black history teaching is really getting at the gist of the complexities about being Black and anti-Blackness, right? That has hindered Black society for many years. And without us understanding that context, students who are in classrooms who just think, well, Black people just didn't have the agency to do various different things, or they weren't intellectual enough, or they didn't try to do this. And because you hear that all the time with some young folk that may say, well, I'm not my ancestors, right? And you're like, well, that's a loaded top loaded comment you said, because actually your ancestors fought very bravely and valiantly and to try to get the freedoms that you enjoy today. but we don't learn that in our classrooms because we're all kind of focusing on, well, these are the first people to do this and this is the heroes. So when we talk about this non-racism, kind of this passive aspect, like, hey, we teach Black history, but we don't teach about the systemic oppression that has stifled, Blackness, right, in Black society, versus the anti, which is more active, which really kind of explores structural racism within the curriculum, which helps us provide context as to why where we're at this particular moment in time.
Thank you for that. Um, I'm going to pivot to an audience question. This one comes from Stacy, and Stacy asks, "What insights can you share for bringing Black history teaching experiences to non-certificated, don't know if I said the word right, individuals who are front-facing with K-12 students? I'm specifically thinking about the micro credential."
Hmm. Let me see. Let me see if I'm understanding the question. Like, what insights can you share for bringing Black history to the experience? And huh. I'm not sure I understand the question. So, what insights can you share for bringing Black history teaching experiences to non-certified individuals who are front-facing? So these are community educators, those who are not kind of official teachers, for folks not teaching in traditional classroom spaces. Okay, all right, great. Yeah, so probably the same I would, give for um certified teachers, right? For me, it's all about, first of all, defining what Black history is and helping students understand what Black history is, right? Black history is just not this history with Black people's faces. It's about perspective taking. Black history is not Black history unless it's coming from Black people's perspectives. If not, then it's just white history and Black faces, right? There's a so helping students and helping the teacher understand that students need to understand that history is manufactured, that Blackness is, you know some things are not historically important to other people based on the experiences that they have, and that's a very important concept. Bringing in community voices, within the teach history, bringing in primary sources, right? To teach those particular histories, oral histories, right? All those particular things, having student voices, student history, to really talk. So really just kind of, just ensuring that students understand the complexities of history, what Black history is, what it's not, and then bringing in those perspectives in that space. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. And related to that, Dr. King, what steps should educators, or, as capacious as that word could mean, what should they take to authentically and effectively teach Black history?
Well, there's a two-step approach here. First, it's having the actual content knowledge, right? Um, and we know many people, just like we spoke before, about kind of understanding the content, right? But then also understanding that there's a certain type of pedagogical knowledge that you need to effectively teach Black history, right? So, by pedagogical knowledge, I'm always, reminded of these teachers that would do these slavery mock auctions, right, in their classrooms, right? And this is a very popular thing that has been done all over the country. Right? These teachers are teaching about slavery, and then they'll say, "Hey, as an activity to help students, relay that particular knowledge, we're going to get a group of students. They could be Black or not or whatever, but they'll get some students, have them stand in front of the class. They're the slaves, and they'll have other students come touch them, and see how strong they are and how much they would pay for a particular person, right? And while that's technically quote unquote Black history, and you're kind of trying to connect the dots between the slavery and student learning and all that stuff, that's not the most effective humanizing way to teach Black history. And those types of things, slavery math problems, slavery recess games, all these things have happened within our society. So it's about having the content knowledge, but also kind of the racial pedagogical content knowledge to be able to figure out, well, what is the most effective approach to teaching this? So if there's, videos, what type of leading questions should we use? What type of context questions we should use? What type of pre and post questions we should use from these videos, particularly videos that may be um, um, that might can harm, psychologically. Um, how should I approach it as a teacher? How should I approach these particular kids? Right, like so. There's always kind of this these kind of unofficial knowledge that you have to have after content knowledge, right? Pedagogical knowledge, cultural relevancy, psychological knowledge, right? All this particular knowledge that helps us kind of understand, like, look, this may not be the best approach here, right? So content knowledge and the pedagogical content knowledge that will help us kind of approach those things.
So a question I have related to that, and I think you addressed this in another one of your many publications, which is quite impressive. How is teaching Black history a racial literacy project? And why is that important work?
Yeah. So Black history is a racial literacy project because it helps us kind of understand the racialized experiences of Black people, right? Racial literacy can be defined in many different ways, but for me, racial literacy helps us understand how we can define various different racial issues, how we can approach different racial issues, and how we can solve those particular racial issues. And history provides a really good blueprint and framework for us to, number one, understand aspects of contemporary society, understand aspects of racialized experiences, right? So someone who's racial literate can understand, well, you know what, the judicial system may be biased towards poor people or maybe biased towards Black people and all these particular aspects because of this history, right? So being literate in society is about really understanding the histories of racialized individuals and helping them understand the structural ways in which they're oppressed in our society. And if you understand the structural ways that people are oppressed in our society, then ideally, hopefully, you will be able to fix those structures to ensure that everyone has a more equitable outcome, for those things, right? So history is very important for us to become racial literate.
Thank you. And do you mind letting us into what your vision of an ideal Black history classroom or Black history learning space looks like?
Great question. Really great question. I think that's the first question I ever had like that. Like my vision of like a proper or a more effective Black history. You know, Black history can't be like other history classes, right? And I guess someone could argue, well, history classes don't need to be like history classes the way they are, right? Um, but this is just a space where learning takes place. For me, I would love a space where students can dictate what they learn in that particular space. So let's say we have like the first week or two is what I would like to call like a zero period, right? Where the teacher and the students negotiate the types of themes or the types of topics that they want to explore. Now, these doesn't have to be chronological. This doesn't have to be something that's very structural, right? This is just like, hey, you know what? I want to learn more about the Black community, um, our local Black community, right? How do I learn why that bakery was around the corner and now it's closed? I heard this street is named after Mr. Johnson. I wonder why the street was named after Mr. Johnson, right? Something nefarious happened to my family three generations ago? Can we research about what happened to my family? Why did he move north? Why did he move right? So given like the initial curiosity of students and negotiating those topics that we can learn throughout the year, and you and the students are like co-creators of the curriculum throughout the year. Now that will take a lot of work, right? Particularly if there's some topics that you're not really familiar with, but a Black history that's more communal, something that you and the students can co-create, something that you and the community can teach together. Multiple teachers can kind of approach that, topics, right? And really kind of explore. What I really would like to do, for each February, like go back to the true meaning of what Black History Week and Black History Month was, right? A lot of people think that February is the only time you should teach about Black history, but the original creator, Woodson, felt that no, February was a time where we review all the things that we learned about Black history from the year, right? So a classic Black History Fair, right, where we really kind of explore the various different topics that were explored throughout the school year, around the yearly theme, right? So I know that it is unorthodox, right? But developing a syllabus that looks just like your U.S. history class, but you just have more Black topics on there, I don't think is an effective approach, to Black history education.
Yeah.
And of course, not forgetting about the principles, right? Making sure the principles are infused throughout the course.
Thank you. That sounds lovely. I would love to take that class. So if you ever develop it, um, I would love to enroll. Um, Now I have a question here about the 1619 project and the fact that it is a project that brought together scholars, across disciplines, scholars without the academy. And so it's an interdisciplinary work. And
Mhm.
so, what role do you think interdisciplinarity can or should play in the teaching of Black history?
I think it's needed. I think it's very important. Probably the most important aspect of it, is so I used to tell teachers like there used to be a saying, and there's still a saying, that everyone should be a reading teacher, everyone should be a literacy teacher because we wanted to improve literacy scores in the schools. Well, I believe that everyone should be a Black history teacher or a history teacher, right? Because history kind of influences everything in our society. It helps us understand people, right? Because history is about identity and history is about humanity. It's the first time that we learn about ourselves, but it's also the first time we learn about others, right? And if people have a deep historical knowledge, right, and then approaches it through their particular prism, right, their subject area, then I think all the courses would be a little bit more lively and better, right? Because you get to really understand kind of like for math, like I had a colleague teach me kind of this different way of doing math, and he said, well, this came from African traditions, right? In African traditions, we solve it what from left to right instead of right to left, right? And the numbers still were very similar, right? So we kind of understand that. It kind of gives us different ways to kind of approach different subjects. And then, in my view, it helps us understand each other better.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. King. And actually, we're at time, so I'm going to wrap up, but I do want to give you the last word here. I will give you the prompt in a second. So I just want to thank everyone for attending today's Impact Showcase. Thank you for coming to Dr. LaGarrett King's keynote address. We hope that you found this conversation to be informative, rich, generative, and that you have plenty to take with you to inform your work in the future. Thank you for sharing your questions and your reflections all throughout the day. We enjoyed celebrating our 1619 Impact Grantees. And then we hope that you would subscribe to our 1619 education newsletter to keep up with future events and opportunities. And I want to end on a high note. Dr. King, you mentioned the importance of dreaming. So to close us out today, could you just share with us what are some of your freedom dreams? What are your hopes for the future?
Wow. I dream of a first of all, I dream that the Pulitzer Center continues to do wonderful work from years to come. I really enjoy what you all do, and I get to know you all a little bit, better through different aspects. So I really appreciate the wonderful work that you all do. So I dream that y'all continue to, influence society, influence teachers. When I talk to people who have worked with you all, they always have really great things to say about everyone there and the organization. But I really dream that everyone is in a space that allows them to teach Black history effectively, critically, and with loving and human care. And if you don't have those spaces within your local schools, I dream that you find those spaces in your local communities.
Thank you so much, Dr. King. What a lovely note to end the evening on. And thank you all for attending our Impact Grantee Showcase. We wish you all the best as you all continue to do the work in your various communities and spaces. Have a great one.